you have a way of getting access to that and deleting it and making sure that we don't store it anymore. In the specific question that the other congressman asked, I think it's possible that we just didn't have the information that he was asking about in the first place, and that's why it wasn't there.
Well, 3 billion user accounts were breached at Yahoo in 2013, 145 million at eBay in 2014, 143 million at Equifax in 2017, 78 million at Anthem in 2015, 76 million at JP Morgan Chase in 2014. The list goes on and on. The security of all that private data is gone, likely sold many times over to the highest bidder on the dark web. We live in an information age. Data breaches and privacy hacks are not a question of if, they are a question of when. But the case with Facebook is slightly different. The 87 million accounts extracted by Cambridge Analytica are just the beginning, with likely dozens of other third parties that have accessed this information. As far as we know, the dam is still broken. As you have noted, Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook's business model is based on capitalizing on the private personal information of your users. Data security should be a central pillar of this model. And with your latest vast breach of privacy and the widespread political manipulation that followed it, the question this committee must ask itself is what role the federal government should play in protecting the American people and the democratic institutions that your platform and others like it have put at risk. In this case, you gave permission to mine the data of some 87 million users based on the deceptive consent of just a fraction of that number. When they found out I was going to be speaking with you today, my constituents asked me to share some of their concerns in person. How can they protect themselves on your platform? Why should they trust you again with their likes, their loves, their lives? Users trusted Facebook to prioritize user privacy and data security, and that changes. But I am indeed wary that you are only acting now out of concern for your brand and only making changes that should have been made a long time ago. You have described this as an arms race, but every time we saw what precautions you have, or in most cases have not taken, your company is caught unprepared and ready to issue another apology. I'm left wondering again why Congress should trust you again. We'll be watching you closely to ensure that Facebook follows through on these commitments. Many of my constituents have asked about your business model, where users are the product. Mary of Half Moon in my district called it infuriating. Andy of Schenectady, New York asked, why doesn't Facebook pay its users for their incredibly valuable data? Facebook claims that users rightly own and control their data, yet their data keeps being exposed on your platform, and these breaches cause more and more harm each time. You have said that Facebook was built to empower its users. Instead, users are having their information abused with absolutely no recourse. In light of this harm, what liability should Facebook have? When users' data is mishandled, who is responsible and what recourse do users have? Do you bear that liability?
Congressman, I think we're responsible for protecting people's information for sure. But one thing that you said that I want to provide some clarity on.
Do you bear the liability?
Well, you said earlier, you referenced that you thought that we were only taking action after this came to light. Actually, we made significant changes to the platform in 2014 that would have made this incident with Cambridge Analytica impossible to happen again today. I wish we'd made those changes a couple of years earlier because this poll app got people to use it back in 2013 and 2014. And if we had made the changes a couple of years earlier, then we would have.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair recognized.
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask that other questions that my constituents have be entered by unanimous consent.
Without objection, of course. That goes for all members. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and thanks for your testimony, Mr. Zuckerberg. Well, first of all, I wanted to follow up with Mr. McKinley's testimony. This is bad stuff, Mr. Zuckerberg, with regard to the illegal online pharmacies. When are those ads? I mean, when are you going to take those off? I think we need an answer to that. I think they need to get off. We need to get these off as soon as possible. Can you give us an answer, a clear answer as to when these pharmacies? We have an epidemic here with regard to the opioids. I think we're owed a clear answer, a definitive answer as to when these ads will be offline.
Congressman, if people flag those ads for us, we will take them down now. Now?
Now?
Yes.
By the end of the day?
If people flag them for us, we will look at them as quickly as we can. That
well, you have knowledge now, obviously. You have knowledge. You have knowledge of those ads. Will you begin to take them down today?
The ads that are flagged for us, we will review and take down if they violate our policies, which I believe the ones that you're talking about do.
They're illegal. They clearly violate your policy.
But what I think really needs to happen here is not just us reviewing content that gets flagged for us. We need to be able to build tools that can proactively go out and identify what might be these ads for opioids before people even have to flag them for us to review.
I agree.
And that's going to be a longer term thing in order to build that solution. But today, if someone flags the ads for us, we will take them down.
Work on those tools as soon as possible, please. Okay, next question. A constituent of mine in District 12 of Florida, the Tampa Bay area, came to me recently with what was a clear violation of your privacy policy. In this case, a third-party organization publicly posted personal information about my constituent on his Facebook page. This included his home address, voting record, degrading photos, and other information. In my opinion, this is cyberbullying. For weeks, my constituent tried reaching out to Facebook on multiple occasions through its report feature, but the offending content remained. It was only when my office got involved that the posts were removed almost immediately for violating Facebook policy. How does Facebook's self-reporting policy work to prevent misuse, and why did it take an act of Congress, a member of Congress, to get, again, a clear privacy violation removed from Facebook? If you can answer that question, I'd appreciate it, please.
Congressman, that clearly sounds like a big issue and something that would violate our policies. I don't have specific knowledge of that case, but what I imagine happened, given what you just said, is they reported it to us, and one of the people who reviews content probably made an enforcement error. And then when you reached out, we probably looked at it again and realized that it violated the policies and took it down. We have a number of steps that we need to take to improve the accuracy of our enforcement.
Absolutely.
That's a big issue. We need to get to content faster, and we need to be able to do better at this. I think the same solution to the opioid question that you raised earlier, of doing more with automated tools, will lead to both faster response times and more accurate enforcement of the policies.
Can you give us a timeline as to when will this be done? I mean, this is very critical listen, my family uses Facebook, my friends, my constituents. We all use Facebook. I use Facebook. It's wonderful for our seniors to connect with their relatives.
Gentleman's time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I submit for the record my additional questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Objection. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 4 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Zuckerman, today I want to take the opportunity to represent the concerns of the newly formed Tech Accountability Caucus, in which I serve as a co-chair with my colleagues, Representative Robin Kelly, Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman. But most importantly, people in our country and around the globe who are in vulnerable populations, including those who look just like me. My first question to you is, as you may be aware, there have been numerous 3,000 Russian ads were bought on Facebook to incite racial and religious division and chaos in the U.S. during the 2016 election. Those ads specifically characterized and weaponized African-American groups like Black Lives Matter, in which ads suggested through propaganda or fake news, as people call it these days, that they were a rising threat. Do you think that the lack of diversity, culturally competent personnel in your C-suite and throughout your organization, in which your company did not detect or disrupt and investigate these claims, are a problem in this regard?
Congresswoman, I agree that we need to work on diversity. In this specific case, I don't think that that was the issue because we were frankly slow to identifying the whole Russian misinformation operation and not just that specific example. Going forward, we're going to address this by verifying the identity of every single advertiser who's running political or issue-oriented ads to make it so that foreign actors or people trying to spoof their identity or say that they're someone that they're not cannot run political ads or run large pages of the type.
So whether they were Russian or not, when you have propaganda, how are you addressing that? Because this was extremely harmful during the last election cycle and can continue to be so in the upcoming elections and throughout the year, right? I'm concerned that there are not eyes that are culturally competent looking at these things and being able to see how this would impact on civil society. If everyone within the organization is monolithic, then you can miss these things very easily. And we've talked about diversity forever with your organization. What can you say today when you look at how all of this operates that you can do immediately to make sure that we have the types of viewing or reviewing that could enable us to catch this in its tracks?
Congresswoman, we announced a change in how we're going to review ads and big pages so that now, going forward, we're going to verify the identity and location of every advertiser who's running political or issue ads or...
Relying on that.
No, that will be in place for these elections.
Okay, fabulous. When Mr. Kogan sold the Facebook-based data that he acquired through the Quiz app to Cambridge Analytica, did he violate Facebook's policies at the time?
Yes, Congresswoman.
When the Obama campaign collected millions of Facebook users' data through their own app during the 2012 election, did it violate Facebook's policies at the time?
No, Congresswoman, it did not.
I hope you understand that this distinction provides little comfort to those of us concerned about our privacy online. Regardless of political party, Americans desperately need to be protected. Democrats on this committee have been calling for strong privacy and data security legislation for years. We really can't wait, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks for joining us today. Let me add my name to the list of folks that you're going to get back to on the rural access question. Please add my name to that list.
Of course.
I got a lot of those folks in my district. You're a real American success story. There's no question that you and Facebook have revolutionized the way Americans, in fact, the world, communicate and interconnect with one another. I think one of the reasons that you were able to do that is because nowhere other than in college can pursue his dreams and ambitions on his own terms without a big federal government over-regulating them and telling them what they can and cannot do, could you have achieved something like this. But in the absence of federal regulations that would reel that in, the only way it works for the betterment of society and people is with a high degree of responsibility and trust. And you've acknowledged that there have been some breakdowns in responsibility. I think sometimes, and I'm a technology guy. I have 2 degrees in computer science. I'm a software engineer. I'm a patent holder. So I know the challenges that you face in terms of managing the technology. But oftentimes technology folks spend so much time thinking about what they can do and little time thinking about what they should do. And so I want to talk about some of those should do kind of things. You heard earlier about faith-based material that had been taken down, ads that had been taken down. You admitted that it was a mistake. That was in my district, by the way, Franciscan University. A faith-based university was the one that did that. How is your content filtered and determined to be appropriate or not appropriate and policy compliant? Is it an algorithm or not appropriate and policy compliant? Is it an algorithm that does it, or is there a team of a gazillion people that sit there and look at each and every ad that make that determination?
Congressman, it's a combination of both. So at the end of the day, we have community standards that are written out and try to be very clear about what is acceptable. And we have a large team of people, as I said, by the end of this. But in order to flag some content quickly, we also build technical systems in order to take things down. So if we see terrorist content, for example, we'll flag that and we can take that down.
What do you do when you find someone or something that's made a mistake? I mean, I've heard you say several times today that you know a mistake has been made. What kind of accountability is there when mistakes are made? Because every time a mistake like that is made, it's a little bit of a chip away from the trust and the responsibility factors. How do you hold people accountable in Facebook when they make those kind of mistakes of taking stuff down that shouldn't be taken down or leaving stuff up that should not be left up?
Congressman, for content reviewers specifically, their performance is going to be measured by whether they do their job accurately. And
you ever fire anybody when they do stuff like that?
I'm sure we do. As part of the normal course of running a company, you're hiring and firing people all the time to grow your capacity and
what happened to the person that took down the Franciscan University ad and didn't put it back up until the media started getting involved?
Congressman, I'm not specifically aware of that case.
Can you take that question for me? My time has expired. Can you take that question for me and get me that answer back, please?
We will.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Lobsack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing today, and I want to thank Mr. Zuckerberg for being here today as well. Add my name to the rural broadband list as well. I have 1/4 of Iowa, the southeast part of Iowa. We definitely need more help on that front. Thank you. You may recall last year, Mr. Zuckerberg, that you set out to visit every state in the country to meet different people. And one of those places you visited was, in fact, Iowa, my home state of Iowa. And you did visit the district that I proudly represent, and you met some of my constituents. As you began your tour, you said that you believed in connecting the world and giving everyone a voice, and that, quote, you wanted, quote, to personally hear more of those voices. I'm going to do the same thing in just a second that a number of my colleagues did and just ask you some questions that were submitted to my Facebook page by some of my constituents. I do want to say at the outset, though, and I do ask for unanimous consent to enter all those questions into the record, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
I think trust has been the issue today. There's no question about it. I think that's what I'm hearing from my constituents. That's what I'm hearing from my constituents. That's what we're hearing from our colleagues. That's really the question. How can we be guaranteed that, for example, when you agree to some things today, that you're going to follow through and that we're going to be able to hold you accountable, and without perhaps constructing too many rules and regulations. We'd like to keep that to a minimum if we possibly can, but I do understand that you have agreed that we're going to have some rules and regulations. So that we can protect people's privacy, so that we can protect that use of the consumer data. So going forward from there, I've just got a few questions I'll probably have an opportunity to get to.
Yes.
And you're the CEO.
Yes.
Right. And so I've got Lauren from Solon who asks, is it possible for Facebook to exist without collecting and selling our data? Is it possible to exist?
Congressman, we don't sell people's data. So I think that's an important thing to clarify up front. And then in terms of collecting data, the whole purpose of the service is that you can share the things that you want with the people around you, right, or and your friends. So
is it possible for you to be in business without sharing the data, because that's what you have done, whether it was selling or not, sharing the data, providing it to Cambridge Analytica and other folks along the way? Is it possible for doing that?
Well, Congressman, it would be possible for our business to exist without having a developer platform. It would not be possible for our business to, or our products or services or anything that we do to exist without having the opportunity for people to go to Facebook, put in the content that they want to share and who they want to share it with, and then go do that. That's the core thing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then Brenda from Muscatine, she has a question obviously related to trust as well, and that is, how will changes promised this time be proven to be completed? She'd like to know, how's that going to happen? If there are changes, you said there have been some changes, how can she and those folks in our districts and throughout America, not just members of Congress, but how can folks in our districts hold you accountable? How do they know that those changes are in fact going to happen? That's what that question's about.
Congressman, for the developer platform changes that we announced, they're implemented. We're putting those into place. We announced a bunch of specific things. It's on our blog, and I wrote it in my written testimony, and that stuff is happening. We're also going back and investigating every single app that had access to a large amount of data before we locked down the platform in the past. We will tell people if we find anything that misused their data, and we will tell people when the investigation is complete.
Thank you. And finally, Chad from Scott County wants to know, who has my data other than Cambridge Analytica?
Congressman, part of what I just said is that we're going to do an investigation of every single app that had access to a large amount of people's data. If you signed into another app, then that app probably has access to some of your data. And part of the investigation that we're going to do is to determine whether those app developers did anything improper, shared that data further beyond that. And if we find anything like that, we will tell people that their data was misused.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. On a voluntary basis, I want to put that out here. You were not subpoenaed to be here, as Mr. Barton offered up a little bit ago. You're the only witness at the table today. We've had folks.
I do.
Who are they?
I believe, is that Diamond and Silk?
That is Diamond and Silk, two biological sisters from North Carolina. I might point out they're African American. And their content was deemed by your folks to be unsafe. So, I don't know what type of a picture this is, if it was taken in a police station or what, in a lineup, but apparently they've been deemed unsafe. Diamond and Silk have a question for you, and that question is, what is unsafe about two black women supporting President Donald J. Trump?
Well, Congressman, nothing is unsafe about that. The specifics of this situation, I'm not as up to speed on as I probably would be if I didn't have hearing that
you have 20,000 employees, as you said, to check content, and I would suggest, as good as you are with analytics, that those 20,000 people, you do some analytical research and see how many conservative websites have been pulled down and how many liberal websites. One of our talk show hosts at home, Nick Reed, this morning on the radio said that if Diamond and Silk were liberal, they'd be on the late night talk show circuit back and forth. They're humorous, they have their opinion, not that you have to agree or that I have to agree, do agree, don't agree with them. But the fact that they're conservative, and I just remember, if you don't remember anything else from this hearing here today, remember, we do nothing and we overreact. And we're getting ready to overreact, so I would suggest you go home and review all these other things people have accused you of today. Get with your good team, they're behind you. You're the guy to fix this. We're not. You need to save your ship. Thank you.
Gentleman's time
Mr. Chairman, since my name was mentioned, can I just respond?
I tell you, if we could move on, just because we're going to run out of time for members down dais to be able to ask their questions.
Okay, I consider Billy Long a good friend. Let me just say that I don't think it was a breach of decorum, and I just take issue with his saying that a very modest bill that I've introduced is an overreach. That's all.
I didn't say it was an overreach. All I said was that I would just remind him of several.
Now recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. Zuckerberg, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate your good offices and voluntarily coming before us. You have testified that you voluntarily took Cambridge Analytica's word that they had deleted information, found out subsequently that they did not delete that information, have sent in your own forensics team, which I applaud. I just want to make sure and get some questions answered here. Can you tell us that they were told not to destroy any data, misappropriated data they may find?
Congressman, so you're right that in 2015, when we found out that the app developer Alexander Kogan had sold data to Cambridge Analytica, we reached out to them. At that point, we demanded that they delete all the data that they had. They told us at that point that they had done that. And then a month ago, we heard a new report that said that that they actually hadn't done that.
But I'm talking about the direction you've given your forensic team. Now, if they find stuff, they're not to delete it at this point in time, or are they going to go ahead and delete it?
The audit team that we are sending in?
Right.
The first order of business is to understand exactly what happened. And
I'm worried about the information being deleted without law enforcement having the opportunity to actually review that. Will you commit to this committee that neither Facebook nor its agents have removed any information or evidence from Cambridge Analytica's offices?
Congressman, I do not believe that we have. And
how about Mr. Kogan's office, if I may ask?
One specific point on this is that our audit of Cambridge Analytica, we've paused that in order to cede to the UK government, which is conducting its own government audit, which of course, an investigation, which of course takes precedence.
With all due respect, what I'm getting at is I'd like to have the information available for the UK or US law enforcement officials, and I did not hear you commit to that. Will you commit to the committee that Facebook has not destroyed any data or records that may be relevant to any federal, state, or international law enforcement investigation?
Congressman, yes. What I'm saying is that the UK government is going to complete its investigation before we go in and do our audit, so they will have full access.
So you suspended your audit pending the UK's investigation?
Yes, we've paused it pending theirs.
So it's my understanding that you and other Facebook executives have the ability to rescind or delete messages that are on people's websites. To be clear, I just want to make sure that if that is indeed the case, that after you've deleted that information, that somehow law enforcement, particularly relevant to this case, would still have access to those messages.
Congressman, yes. We have a document retention policy of the company where for some people we delete emails after a period of time, but we, of course, preserve anything that there's a legal hold on.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. While you've testified very clearly that you do not sell information, it's not Facebook's model. You do the advertising and obviously have other means of revenue. But it's pretty clear others do sell that information. Doesn't that make you somewhat complicit in what they're doing? You're allowing them to sell the information that they glean from your website?
Well, Congressman, I would disagree that we allow it. We actually expressly prohibit any developer that people
How do you enforce that? That's my concern. How do you enforce that? Complaint only is what I've heard so far. Tonight.
Yes, Congressman. Some of it is in response to reports that we get, and some of it is we do spot checks to make sure that the apps are actually doing what they say they're doing. And going forward, we're going to increase the number of audits that we do as well.
So last question is it's my understanding based on the testimony here today that even after I'm off of Facebook, that you guys still have the ability to follow my web interactions. Is that correct?
Congressman,
I've logged out of Facebook. Do you still have the ability to follow my interactions on the web?
Congressman, you have control over what we do for ads and the information collection around that. On security, there may be specific things about how you use Facebook, even if you're not logged in, that we keep track of to make sure that people aren't abusing the systems.
Gentleman's time has expired. And just for our members who haven't had a chance to ask questions, we will pause at 1:30. Well, we will have votes at 1:40. We will continue the hearing after a brief pause, and we'll coordinate that. We'll go now to Dr. Bashan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. There are plenty of anecdotal examples, including from family members of mine, where people will be verbally discussing items never having actually been on the internet at the time. And then the next time they get on Facebook or other online apps, ads for things that they were verbally discussing with each other will show up. And I know you said in the Senate that Facebook doesn't specifically listen to what people are saying through their phone, whether that's a Google phone or whether it's Apple or another one. However, the other day, my mother-in-law and I were discussing her brother who had been deceased for about 10 years, and later on that evening on her Facebook site she had set to music kind of a in memoriam picture collage that came up on Facebook, specifically to her brother, and that happened the other night. So if you're not listening to us on the phone, who is, and do you have specific contracts with these companies that will provide data that is being acquired verbally through our phones, or now through things like Alexa or other products?
Congressman, we're not collecting any information verbally on the microphone, and we don't have contracts with anyone else who is. The only time that we might use the microphone is when you're recording a video or doing something where you intentionally are trying to record audio, but we don't have anything that is trying to listen to what's going on in the background.
Okay, because, I mean, like I said, you've talked to people that this has happened to. My son, who lives in Chicago, him and his colleagues were talking about a certain type of suit because they're business guys, and the next day he had a bunch of ads for different suits on it when he went onto the internet. So it's pretty obvious to me that someone is listening to the audio on our phones, and that I see that as a pretty big issue. And the reason is because, and you may not be, but I see it as a pretty big issue because, for example, if you're in your doctor's office, if you're in your corporate boardroom, your office, or even personal areas of your home, that's potentially an issue. I'm glad to hear that Facebook isn't listening, but I'm skeptical that someone isn't. And I see this as an industry-wide issue that you could potentially help address. And the final thing I'll just ask is that when you have, say, an executive session or whatever, your corporate board, and you have decisions to be made, do you allow the people in the room to have their phones on them?
Congressman, we do. I don't think we have a policy that says that your phone can't be on. And again, I'm not familiar with. Facebook doesn't do this, and I'm not familiar with other companies that do either. My understanding is that a lot of these cases that you're talking about are a coincidence, or someone might be talking about something, but then they also go to a website or interact with it on Facebook because they were talking about it, and then maybe they'll see the ad because of that, which is a much clearer statement of the intent.
Okay, because if that's the case, then, I know for convenience, companies have developed things like Alexa, and I don't want to and other companies are developing things like that. But it just seems to me that the whole point of those products is not just for your own convenience, but when you're verbally talking about things and you're not on the internet, they are able to collect information on the type of activities that you're engaging in. So I'd implore the industry to look into that and make sure that, in addition to physical exploring the internet and collecting data, that data being taken verbally not be allowed. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience and over both days of testimony. You spoke about the framing of your testimony about privacy, security, and democracy. I want to ask you about privacy and democracy. Because I think obviously those are linked. You've said over the course of questioning yesterday and today that users own all of their data. So I want to make sure that we drill down on that a little bit, and I think our colleagues have tried. That includes, I believe, that the information that Facebook requires users to make public. So that would be a profile picture, gender, age range, all of which is public-facing information. That's right?
Yes.
Okay. So can advertisers then, understanding that you, Facebook, maintain the data, you're not selling that to anybody else, but advertisers clearly end up having access through that through agreements with you about how they then target ads to me, to you, to any other user. Can advertisers in any way use non-public data, so data that individuals would not think is necessarily public, so that they can target their ads?
Congressman, the way this works is, let's say you have a business that is selling skis, okay, and you have on your profile that you are interested in skiing, but let's say you haven't made that public, but you share it with your friends, right? So broadly. We don't tell the advertiser that here's a list of people who like skis. They just say, okay, we're trying to sell skis. can you reach people who like skis, and then we match that up on our side without sharing any of that information?
Understood. They don't. You don't share that, but they get access to that information, so that if they know that they want to market skis to me because I like skis, on the realm of data that is accessible to them, does Facebook include deleted data?
Congressman, no.
Okay.
And I also would push back on the idea that we're giving them access to the data. We allow them to reach people who said that on Facebook, but we're not giving them access to the data.
Fair. So, can advertisers either directly or indirectly get access to or use the metadata that Facebook collects in order to more specifically target ads? So that would include, I know you've talked a lot about how Facebook would use access to information for folks that, I might be able to opt in or out about your ability to track me to other websites. Is that used by those advertisers as well?
Congressman, I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Essentially, does the advertisers that are using your platform, do they get access to information that the user does not actually think is either one, being generated, or two, is public? Understanding that, yes, if you dive into the details of your platform, users might be able to shut that off. But I think one of the challenges with trust here is that there's an awful lot of information that's generated that people don't think that they're generating, and that advertisers are being able to target because Facebook collects it.
Yes. So, Congressman, my understanding is that the targeting options that are available for advertisers are generally things that are based on what people share. Now, once an advertiser chooses how they want to target something, Facebook also does its own work to help rank and determine which ads are going to be interesting to which people. So we may use metadata or other behaviors of what you've shown that you're interested in a newsfeed or other places in order to make our systems more relevant to you. But that's a little bit different from giving that as an option to an advertiser, if that makes sense.
Right. But then I guess the question back to, and I only got 20 seconds, I think one of the rubs that you're hearing is, I don't understand how users then own that data. I think that's part of the rub. Second, you focus a lot of your testimony and the questions on the individual privacy aspects of this, but we haven't talked about the societal implication of it. And I think while I applaud some of the reforms that you're putting forward, the underlying issue here is that your platform has become a mix of 2 seconds. News, entertainment, social media, that is up for manipulation. We've seen that with a foreign actor. If the changes to individual privacy don't seem to be sufficient to address that underlying issue.
Time has expired.
Love your comments on that at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here today. I'm up here, top row. I'm certain that there are other things you'd rather be doing. The activities of Facebook and other technology companies should not surprise us. I mean, we've seen it before, and again, don't take this critically, but we saw a large oil company become a monopoly back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We saw a large telecommunications company become a near monopoly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And just as Facebook, these companies were founded by bright entrepreneurs. Their companies grew. And eventually, they sometimes became detached from everyday Americans. And what happened is policymakers then had to step in and reestablish the balance between those folks and everyday Americans. You didn't intend for this to happen. It did happen, and I appreciate that you've apologized for it. And one of the things I appreciate about Facebook, it appears you're proactively trying to address the situation. Just as we addressed those monopolies in the past, we're faced with that situation today. We need to, and this goes beyond Facebook. This has to do with the edge providers. It has to do with social media organizations and also with ISPs. Back to Facebook in particular, though, we heard examples yesterday during the Senate hearing and also today during this hearing so far about ideological bias among the users of Facebook. In my Texas district, I had a retired school teacher whose conservative postings were banned or stopped. The good news is I was able to work with Facebook's personnel and get her reinstated. That said, the Facebook censors still seem to be trying to stop her postings, and anything you can do in that regard to fix that bias will go a long way. I want to move a different direction. That's to talk about the future. Congress needs to consider policy responses, as I said earlier, and I want to call this policy response Privacy 2.0 and Fairness 2.0. With respect to fairness, I think the technology companies should be ideologically agnostic regarding their users' public-facing activities. The only exception would be for potentially violent behavior. I'll ask my question is on this. Do you agree that Facebook and other technology platforms should be ideologically neutral?
Congressman, I agree that we should be a platform for all ideas, that we should focus on that.
Good. I've got limited time. With respect to privacy, I think that we need to set a baseline. When we talk about a virtual person that each technology user establishes online, their name, address, their online purchases, geolocation data, websites visited, pictures, etc., I think that the individual owns the virtual person that they've set up online. My second question is this. You said earlier that each user owns their virtual presence. Do you think that this concept should apply to all technology providers, including social media platforms, edge providers, and ISPs?
Congressman, yes. In general, I think that people own their information.
I'm not trying to cut you off. You can provide more information supplementally after, if you don't mind. In this regard, I believe that if Congress enacts privacy standards for technology providers, just as we have for financial institutions, healthcare, employee benefits, etc., the policy should state that the data of technology users should be held privately unless they specifically consent to the use of the data by others. This release should be based upon the absolute transparency as to what data will be used, how it will be processed, where it will be stored, what algorithms will be applied to it, who will have access to it, if it will be sold, and to whom it might be sold. The disclosure of this information and the associated opt-in actions should be easy to understand and easier for non-technical users to execute. The days of the long scrolling fine print disclosures with a single check mark at the bottom should end. In this regard, based on my use of Facebook, I think you've come a long way toward meeting that objective. I think we must move further. I'll have two other questions to submit later. And thank you. You can expand on your responses to my earlier questions later. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 4 minutes. Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. Seems like we've been here forever, don't you think? Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing. I'm of the opinion that basically we're hearing from one of the leaders, the CEO of one of the biggest corporations in the world, but yet almost entirely in an environment that is unregulated, or for basic terms, that the lanes in which you're supposed to operate in are very wide and broad, unlike other industries. Yet at the same time, I have a chart here of the growth of Facebook. Congratulations to you and your shareholders. It shows that in 2009, your net value of the company was less than, revenue was less than $1 billion. And then you look all the way over to 2016, it was in excess of 26 billion. And then in 2017, apparently about close to 40 billion. Are those numbers relatively accurate about the growth and the phenomenon of Facebook?
Congressman, they sound relatively accurate.
Okay. Just so you know, it just brought to my attention, my staff texted me a little while ago that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica apparently stepped down sometime today. I don't know if anybody of your team there whispered that to you, but my staff just reported that. That's interesting. The fact that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica stepped down, does that in and of itself solve the issue and the controversy around what they did?
Congressman, I don't think so. There are a couple of big issues here. One is what happens specifically with Cambridge Analytica. How were they able to buy data from a developer that people chose to share it with? And how do we make sure that that can't happen again?
But some of that
But
some of that information did originate with Facebook, correct?
People had it on Facebook and then chose to share theirs and some of their friends' information with this developer. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Something was brought to my attention most recently that apparently Facebook does buy information to add or augment the information build around them, their profile.
Congressman, we just recently announced that we were stopping working with data brokers as part of the ad system.
But you did do that to build your company.
It's an industry standard ad practice, and recently, upon examining all of our systems, we decided that's not a thing that we want to be a part of, even if everyone else is doing it.
But you did engage in that as well, not just everybody else, but Facebook yourselves, you did engage in that.
Yes, until we announced that we're shutting it down, yes.
Okay. It's my understanding that when The Guardian decided to report on the Cambridge Analytica consumer data issue, Facebook threatened to sue them if they went forward with their story. It appears, did it happen something like that? Facebook kind of warned them like, hey, maybe you don't want to do that?
Congressman, I don't believe that, I think that there may have been a specific factual inaccuracy that we...
So in other words, you checking The Guardian and saying you're not going to want to go out with that story because it's not 100% factual.
That's a specific point, yes.
Okay. Now, but however, they did go through with their story, regardless of the warnings or the threats of Facebook saying that you're not going to want to do that. When they did do that, and only then did Facebook actually apologize for that incident, for that 89 million users' information, unfortunately, ending up in their hands. Isn't that the case? Isn't that the case?
Congressman, you're right that we apologized after they posted the story. They had the most of the details of what was right there, and I don't think we objected to that.
Thank you.
Specific things.
Okay, but I only have a few more seconds. My main point is this: I think it's time that you, Facebook, if you want to truly be a leader in all the sense of the word, and recognize that you can, in fact, do right by American users of Facebook, and when it comes to information, unfortunately, getting in the wrong hands, you can be a leader. Are you committed to actually being a leader in that sense?
Chairman, the gentleman's time.
Can you give a 2-second answer?
Sure. Congressman, I am definitely committed to taking a broader view of our responsibility. That's what my testimony is about, making sure that we don't just give people tools, but make sure that they're used for good.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, we will recess for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We'll recess for 10 minutes and then resume the hearing.